Joining me now is Tom Littleton. We call him our religious Trojan horse reporter. And we want to talk about Mike Pence. Mike Pence. Well, you know, Mike Pence is clearly a part of the deep state, right? But did you know he's now, I think, clearly identified himself as part of the religious deep state? That's something Tom Littleton and I have been writing about for several years. You know, I wrote the book in 2018, Marxianity. It's over 300 pages. It's how Marxism and Christianity have merged. The promotion of cultural Marxism, open borders, redefining the gospel to include social justice, the social gospel, redistribution of wealth, claiming this is what Jesus was for, radical environmentalism. All of this has come into the mainstream of evangelicalism. I'm not talking about your mainline churches of the 1950s and 60s. I'm talking about your mainstream evangelical churches and church denominations, groups like Together for the Gospel, groups like the Gospel Coalition, groups that even John MacArthur of Masters College and Seminary and Grace to You has promoted and put on his platform and put those people on his church platform over and over again. Even recently, within the last year, people like the former pastor of Bethlehem Baptist, John Piper, who's promoted Black Lives Matter, taking a knee for the national anthem, and has a completely heretical gospel saying that for final salvation, one must slay sin and pursue holiness. Well, slaying sin and pursuing holiness is a great idea, but that's part of sanctification, not justification. You don't earn your salvation. For final salvation, no, that's works. There's justification, faith in Christ alone in his death, burial, and resurrection. Instant faith. Believe in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved. Justification. Then sanctification, ongoing faithfulness and obedience. But our sanctification is not what saves us. It's faith alone through justification. So we know that people like John Piper have a false gospel. He's promoted social justice and said Christians don't need to have guns. He's part of the Gospel Coalition, Together for the Gospel. John MacArthur puts these people on his church platform over and over again. So I'm trying to tell you, that's why I had to write the book, Marxianity, because this Marxianity has come into mainstream evangelicalism. And one of the leaders of this has been a guy by the name of Russell Moore, who was at the Southern Baptist Convention at one time. And Russell Moore, of course, came from where? He was mentored by Al Mohler. Al Mohler is with a theological seminary out of Kentucky, Southern Baptist. And Al Mohler's called Russell Moore a man from Issachar, Old Testament. The tribe of Issachar was thought to be wise, and they were, because they understood the times and knew how God would have them to respond. And here's Al Mohler calling Russell Moore, who he mentored, a man from Issachar. And yet Al Mohler has also done this same thing of promoting Marxianity. And yet now here is Mike Pence jumping in publicly with both feet, proving to us that Mike Pence is, I think, not only a deep stater in politics, but now he's jumping in with the religious deep state. Joining me now, and we're going to play some clips. Got some clips. Joining me now is Tom Littleton. Hey, Tom, thanks for being with us.
Sure thing, Brannon. Hey, this Trump administration is keeping you guys busy, aren't they?
We're running some awfully long hours. That's for sure. What do you make of what I just said, my little opening monologue? You agree with all that?
Yeah, and you know, interestingly enough, that 2018, when you published Marxianity, was a pivotal year for these operatives within the evangelical deep state, because Russell Moore and the Gospel Coalition, him heading the ERLC, that's when they rolled out a critical race theory-based event, the MLK 50, pushing social justice and wealth redistribution and in the name of racial reconciliation, and then later a big LGBTQ movement. And this was done in the heart of the conservative Presbyterians and the conservative Baptists. So 2018 was a turning point, and you and I had been observing this for over a decade and a half, that they were getting more obvious, but suddenly this thing couldn't be hidden anymore. Now, your book, brought a lot of light to a lot of people, and also the reporting that we were able to do on your network. So it's definitely happening. And Pence, I would say, is not mistaken as a conservative by very many truly conservative evangelicals. And yet here is this political operative Moore trying to mainstream him again into the Christian evangelical camp. I don't think there are going to be many takers on that personally.
No, I don't either. Well, here he is. Here he is with Russell Moore. Listen to this.
I might have been the first.
Well, let's back that up. That's a little hot. Here we go.
Been the first to call on Republicans in the Senate to reject the nomination of RFK Jr. as Secretary of Health and Human Services. You know, there are many aspects of the government that bear upon the issue of life, none more important than health and human services. It was one of the reasons why during our transition in 2016 and 2017, all of our candidates, first and foremost, were supporters of the right to life. Ultimately, our nominee, Secretary Tom Price, would move forward and advance the cause of life. And we made great progress. As you know, you were directly involved in a number of those issues through administrative action. But I understand people's desire to defer to the incoming president and the team that he has around him. But there's a reason why our founders gave the Senate the authority to advise and consent. It's the ability to help shape an administration and in some respects serve as guardrails around what the American people voted for. And I would just say to anyone in the sound of my voice today that the Secretary of Health and Human Services on a month-by-month basis makes more decisions that bear upon the sanctity of life and protections of religious liberty than any other member of an administration except the President of the United States. And so I think it's incumbent on the Senate now, in the Health Committee in the Senate, to ask the tough questions of RFK Jr. to get the answers, but ultimately, my hope is that the Senate will reject his nomination as Secretary of HHS and give President Trump an opportunity to nominate any number of men and women who are eminently qualified to lead health and human services, but also would bring with them a deep commitment to the sanctity of life.
Well, of course, yesterday we heard RFK Jr. in his Senate confirmation hearing stating, look, I'm going to go with the president's agenda. I serve at the pleasure of the president. I'm going to go along with his agenda, and I'm for stopping using aborted fetuses for any kind of research at NIH, et cetera, et cetera. He has said he thinks that we have too many abortions. Again, I can handle RFK Jr. I don't agree with him on some of his positions on environment and other things. But if he can do, and Donald Trump has even said this. He said, look, he said this before he was inaugurated. We need to keep RFK Jr. in his lane, okay? And that's his job as a president, is to make sure that his appointees stay in their lane. And if RFK will stay in his lane dealing with vaccines, processed foods, all these things where I agree with him on, then I have no problem with him. And he said, under oath, he is going to stick with the president's pro-life theme. So again, I just find it interesting that Mike Pence is so concerned about RFK Jr., but it was Pence that we're told brought in Birx and Fauci and was pushing the vaccine, which wasn't the vaccine. Did it have aborted fetal cells in some of these lines? So where was his pro-life stance then? Talk about being pro-life. How many did the vax kill? How many did the vax injure? Wasn't Mike Pence behind a lot of that, helping run that, Tom Littleton?
Absolutely. Pence really showed his colors during the beginning of the pandemic, and not just over the election issue, but clearly over the vax and the misinformation that the government was putting out, the CDC, the operatives that were brought in. And, most of us have really felt like the Trump administration was being played severely during that time into the lockdowns and everything. And we see Pence emerging within that camp that was part of the play to destroy the American economy and to basically erase all the gains that the Trump administration had brought about. It's interesting in this interview, when I listened to it, Pence is trying to dance around his days with Trump. I remember he appeared at the Southern Baptist Convention in 2018 and spoke. And I was there as a reporter for Worldview, and if you recall, they had Pence, and Moore and all these other guys were acting like Pence was the enemy because he was Trump's vice president.
But they didn't want him there. Some of them didn't want him speaking, and all of a sudden Russell Moore wants to kiss up to Pence.
Right. And so these guys have just, that's what they're playing. They've got their finger in the wind, the political winds. And, that just lets you know that, of course, Russell Moore is a Democrat and worked for a Democratic congressman. But, this guy Pence is like the face of Rhino Republican. And what he did on January 6th, January 7th, everybody knows that was a major fail for the true conservatives. And then he's been a key figure in the part of the January 6th narratives, this insurrection narrative, which is totally false. And so they play that up in this video as well.
In fact, here's a clip. Here's that clip. I got it right here. Here we go.
How will you feel if on January 20th or sometime in the first weeks of the administration, the rioters who breached the Capitol and threatened your life and beat up police officers are pardoned?
For people that were caught up in that moment and did no violence, but found themselves swept into the Capitol, I understand. I can appreciate sensitivity to those people, and I'm sure there were many. But for the more than 400 individuals, many of whom pled guilty to assaulting police officers, I would hope the president would think better of that. The respect for law enforcement, and to a lesser extent, just the respect for our seat of government, the United States Capitol, is something we ought to reaffirm. And so I hope the president would not pardon anyone who engaged in violence against police officers or vandalized the U.S. Capitol. But again, I would have a generous attitude toward people that may have been caught up in the moment, but engaged in no violence that day.
Okay, he's asking all the wrong questions. What he needs to be asking is, who opened the door? Mike Pence acts like they somehow powerfully overcame the magnetic doors and broke in. Those doors were open. Right. Pence should be asking, who opened the doors? Pence should be asking, why did Nancy Pelosi deny all the security that they needed? He should be asking, why did police say, come on in, but respect the property, and doing selfies with people? Pence should be asking, who are all the masked people whose faces we can't identify, who were breaking the glass when patriots were going up and saying, don't break the windows of the Capitol, stop doing that? Who were those guys? One of the congressmen up there on the Hill tells us that he has information that there were dozens, and now I guess we know it's come out, dozens of FBI informants or agents or their people that they hire up on Capitol Hill involved in this and agitating for this. Then we need to ask, why did we have the Capitol Police or whoever that was posing as Capitol Police firing flashbangs and rubber bullets at people? Why was there, this seemed to be an absolute setup, and Pence is asking all the wrong questions. Now, again, some of these people were pleading to things because they had no choice. Here's the deal. Go to jail for a gazillion years or plead to this and go for 2 years or 17 months or a year or whatever. So he's acting like people were going around beating up police. I don't see that. Did you see them beating up police? To the contrary, I saw a couple people die that day. One shot Ashley Babbitt. Mrs. O'Boyle was beat and died. I mean, Pence, is he really this lacking in knowledge of what happened that day, or is he just a very dishonest person?
Well, as well as I do, that we were both members of Parler because people had fled Twitter and gone to Parler. And Parler is where people who were in D.C. at the time were posting these videos of the police holding the doors open, removing the barricades, touring people around. And the shaman got a personal private tour of the whole Capitol. But when they prosecuted him, they withheld that footage from his defense, if you recall. So this whole thing was was highly manipulative. And then in this interview with Moore, they ramp up the manipulation with saying that Pence's wife and daughter were there and that they too were in harm's way. So this is a highly manipulated Rhino and Democratic Party operative to draft this narrative and paint this picture as an armed insurrection with the same people who were backing and helping fund and promote Black Lives Matter in the same year, just months before, as they, even in D.C., as they're burning and looting and actually tearing up stuff and having a Marxist revolution right in the streets of all of our major cities. So there were actually some of the same operatives from BLM who were in the Capitol that day who were urging these people on, people who've been arrested in BLM riots. So you cannot believe a shred of this narrative, and especially for Russell Moore and Pence to be bringing this narrative afresh to evangelicals, to expect to package it up and put a bow on it and to show what a hero that Pence was on January 6th, January 7th, and doing his constitutional duty. That is just another chapter in this false narrative that Americans had better reject. It's already been written into our history books, but it is a totally false narrative.
Well, here's President Trump. President Trump had Russell Moore's number back in 2016.
Yeah,
Dr. Moore, Russell Moore is truly a terrible representative of evangelicals and all the good they stand for. A nasty guy with no heart. Well, he's right. Russell Moore was so up in Obama's grill. We have pictures of him in the Oval Office working with Obama. I mean, he was all for the open borders and everything, was he not? Russell Moore working with Obama?
Yeah, I sent those to you in the first email. There's pictures of him in the Oval Office, and he worked very closely with Obama's faith outreach coordinator, who was named Michael Ware, as did other members of the Gospel Coalition. He worked with them with the Soros money, with the evangelical immigration roundtable, and they continue to push a very left-wing open borders and other narratives with the Obama Foundation after Obama left office. So, it's amazing that he was so openly anti-Trump after he had been. So there's more on the right.
More is right there next to Biden. And you know what's very interesting about that is I recognize a lot of these people in this room. Right next to him,
Wallace.
You have, Jim Wallace is right there. Jim Wallace is Sojourners. Jim Wallace has criticized conservative, pro-life, anti-communist evangelicals like crazy. Jim Wallace has. I mean, he's big time in my book, Religious Trojan Horse, The Coming Religious Reich, and particularly Marxianity. I mean, Jim Wallace is a neo-Marxist, okay? Plain and simple. And then next to him in the middle, that is the one-time president of the National Association of Evangelicals, Leith Anderson. Ironically, I've been writing about Leith Anderson for years, coming out against Leith Anderson for years, and I sang for a family friend's funeral in 2011, and it was held at this guy's church. And when I was introduced to him, hey, Pastor Leith Anderson, this is Brannon Howse. Leith's face went all but white. Like, I can't believe I have that this guy's here and he's actually going to sing in the service, which I did. So he clearly, from the facial expression I got from him, knew who I was. But I've been criticizing Leith for years because the National Association of Evangelicals was started originally by guys to counter the I think Fabian socialist World Council of Churches, right? And then the NAE, the National Association of Evangelicals, went from countering it to joining it in lockstep. You know, Jesus would drive a Volkswagen Bug and all this radical environmentalism. So you got Jim Wallace, you got Leith Anderson, then of the National Association of Evangelicals, and then Russell Moore. And then over on the other side, on the other couch in the far side, that man on the side of Obama right there on the couch all the way down, that's Joel Hunter. Joel Hunter has pushed all kinds of ecumenical kumbaya with Islamists. The late Phil Haney, one of the founders of the Department of Homeland Security, who wrote the book See Something, Say Nothing, who was trying to keep all these jihadis out of the country, and I think our government murdered him. He was talking about Joel Hunter all the time in his kumbayas with these Islamist imams. This is the crowd Russell Moore was running with, that you and I, Phil Haney, and others have warned about for years. And now he wants to be buddy-buddy with Pence. And Pence is either too stupid or too complicit now with the religious deep state to see what he's doing. But I think he's complicit. I think he knows exactly who Russell Moore is. And I think I think Pence has now revealed his hand. He is not a spiritual friend of true Christians.
I agree. And of course, that picture where they're in the Oval Office, that's where they're plotting and strategizing all of this faith-based partnerships that these guys were a part of. The CEO of the Southern Baptist Convention Executive Committee was part of the original faith-based partnership team. So that's what they were strategizing. And Leith Anderson, you talked to, he was the key person that worked with bringing the Peter Drucker legacy and ideology into evangelicalism and actually spawned things like the emergent movement and guys like Rick Warren and Tim Keller and others, all part of that leadership network training ground for ambitious pastors. So this was really the origins of massive billions of dollars that were going to flood into evangelical churches and basically buy out conservative evangelicals, and where they would not resist the Obama agenda. And of course, they didn't. You see him there again in the White House. So it's pretty sad that we are we're seeing this again constitute on the other side of all that's been revealed about it, that these operatives believe that they can still get a hearing. Now, I'll tell you what's very dangerous about Russell Moore is that he is highly regarded among so many young pastors. If your pastor is under 40, 45 years old, he has grown up in the seminaries and under the shadow of influences of people like Russell Moore, who was a student, then a professor, then dean, then provost of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary for a total of 24 years. And then when he replaced Richard Land at the Ethics and Religious Liberties Commission, he was a champion with his third way politics for so many young pastors who were rebuffing their parents and their grandparents for being committed to the Reagan era, Reagan revolution and Reaganomics. And they saw that and the moral majority as something to be distinguishing themselves from and pushing away from. They saw Russell Moore as sort of their Pied Piper into this third way compromise. So, but it wasn't coming from someone who was in the middle, neutral. It was coming from someone who is a committed Democrat and in the Oval Office with Obama and trying to pull Christians away from their conservative and biblical values. So
let's make sure the audience understands this third way. That's basically taking socialism and capitalism and merging them together for a third option, which is communitarianism, communism light, which is where we're going. And this guy, Russell Moore, was helping lead evangelicals, the Gospel Coalition, Together for the Gospel, Russell, Al Mohler, all of these guys right along the path of really taking the church in America, the evangelical church, and making it impotent, now making it a willing participant, and I think building the kingdom of Antichrist, right? That's what's coming, and they're helping build it. Let me show another screenshot you provided for us today. The NIH director, Dr. Francis Collins, on the COVID-19 vaccines. And voila, there's Russell Moore. Now, if Russell Moore and Pence are so concerned about the pro-life issue, do you know how many times we've interviewed OBGYN, Dr. James Thorpe? We produce his show with Dr. Moon. Do you know how many babies were aborted, not by a doctor, but by the vaccine? Do you know how many babies died because the mother took the vaccine while pregnant, or took it and then she got pregnant and it impacted her pregnancy, or the infertility, or the babies that were born and then were given these shots and boosters that died or are going to be sick the rest of their life? How dare these guys? How dare Mike Pence sit there and talk about the pro-life issue when he was behind pushing this shot on people, and we're the ones brought in Fauci and brought in Birx to President Trump. Now, if that's not true, Mikey Pence is welcome to come here, but I highly doubt he has the courage to do that. to face the music live and debate the issues. So that's very troubling. Here's another one. COVID-19 vaccines. There's Russell Moore again pushing those things. Francis Collins, Russell Moore, host Evangelicals and COVID-19 vaccines. There you go. Anything you want to say about this before we close?
Of course, beneath Russell Moore is the then editor of Christianity Today, Timothy Dalrymple, I think is how you say it, which now Russell Moore is the editor-in-chief at Christianity Today, pushing all this stuff. And then you have this guy, Jamie, on the bottom left under Collins, who is head of this disaster, basically a master's program on training FEMA advocates and helpers within the evangelical church that is at Wheaton. Of course, we all know how much that Francis Collins has been exposed since all this time when they were pushing the vaccine. But Russell Moore and Rick Warren, Ed Stetzer, all these guys were really pushing, key Southern Baptists at the time were really pushing the vax, pushing the lockdowns in support of the entire pandemic narrative. And now we see all this stuff getting rolled out, and even out of Congress back in October, that what they were calling us conspiracy theories for believing, even Congress has now said, no, it is not a conspiracy theory. The FBI has confirmed this thing did originate in a Wuhan lab, and we know that these guys that, particularly Collins, that is being featured by our chief ethicist at the time with the ERLC, Russell Moore, telling us how we should respond to the pandemic, that those guys were using burner phones and alternative emails and preaching a totally false narrative and lying even to Congress, he and Fauci, about the origins of and their part in funding the gain of function activities that were going on in the Wuhan lab. So
in fact, here's another one. Here's more with Michael Weir, who worked for the AND campaign, which we've did a whole show on that. And that Michael Weir was big in the Obama administration. Every time you turn around, you find Russell Moore with an Obama person. And now Mikey Pence hooks his wagon to him. Again, Moore has been a Democrat pretty much his entire life. In fact, I think this is the Democrat he worked for. Is it not this guy right here?
Yes, Gene Taylor, who is a Mississippi Democrat, and Moore in college became it was in political science. He wanted a political career himself, and he worked for this U.S. congressman for quite some time. I think when his own political ambitions withered is when he decided to go the way of being this public theologian, and he was taken under the wing of Al Mohler. And make no mistake, Al Mohler, one of the most strategic and influential theologians from the neo-Calvinist camp within the Southern Baptist Convention, is the mentor for this guy. He trained Russell Moore for 24 years, employed him, and then, as you said, called him a man from Issachar, as he put him out as the head of the ERLC. That was 8 years of terror that Russell Moore was able to torment Southern Baptists and try to shame them daily for voting conservatively with their convictions and not voting and following his third way narrative. And eventually Moore got in trouble with his anti-Trump stance because more and more evangelicals and Southern Baptists in particular called his hand on it. So he was let go from the ERLC in 2021, only after he had helped launch this influence of the AND campaign, of Revoice, which is a big LGBT inclusion movement. And also Moore in 2018, 2019 helped launch the Me Too movement, what they call the Church Too movement within the Southern Baptist Convention, which has decimated the Southern Baptist Convention and brought it under DOJ investigation and cost it tens of millions of dollars in paying for investigations and task force and independent reports. And basically the Me Too movement has left the Southern Baptist Convention and its mission program shredded. it has all but destroyed the executive committee of Southern Baptist Convention.
Well, I think that's God's judgment on the Southern Baptists. It's been Southern Baptist Convention hasn't been worth a pitcher of warm spit for decades, sadly. Certainly not since the 1990s. 1996, I think it was, when they couldn't pass a resolution condemning Freemasonry, and actually passed a resolution saying aspects of Freemasonry were consistent with Christianity. I think that's when God started removing his hand, and it's gone down the toilet ever since. So good riddance to the apostate Southern Baptist Convention, who, by the way, so many of their deacons and elders are Masons, which of course means they've bowed the knee to the worshipful master in the lodge, opened their shirt with a blindfold on, and said that they're lost in darkness and need the light of Freemasonry to save them. And then they work their way all the way up to the Shriners, where they literally wear a little red hat with a crescent moon and a sword of Islam and swear an allegiance to Allah, which we know is really Satan, because you just look at the descriptions of Allah in the Quran and Satan in the Bible, and they're the same. So, you know what? The Southern Baptist Convention, I left their Southern Baptist Convention church probably 10 years ago because the pastor of the church wanted to talk about I surrender all to Jesus. I surrender all, commit to Jesus, and to cough up your 10% of the church, which is not in the Bible. That's the tithe of the Old Testament. For Israel as part of their civic and ceremonial law, and it's actually more than 10% when you combine the first, second, third tithe. But I'm like, you know what? You say you're all for Jesus. Don't you have a couple deacons that are going down to the lodge and part of the Freemasons, which is a cultic, mystical occult? Would you ask them if they're members of the lodge? No, I will not. But I thought you were all about surrendering to Jesus. Up until a point, I don't want to confront the people that gave me my job and were on the pulpit committee, Brannon. These are the guys that hired me. You want me to ask them if they're lodge members? No, he didn't want to ask them that because he knows the answer. There's a Facebook page showed they were members of the lodge. So Southern Baptist Convention, by and large, I know some good Southern Baptist pastors, but there's not many left. The denomination's compromised. And in fact, the good Southern Baptist pastors that stood up to this, tried to pass the resolution against Freemasonry, they were not successful because the Freemasons sent all their people to that year's convention to vote this thing down. So I think it's been a denomination in decline for several decades. But the point is this, in closing, a lot of people are like, why do we care about this? Well, first of all, the Southern Baptist Convention is like the largest Protestant denomination in America, number one. Number two, it shows that the religious deep state and Satan have been penetrating mainstream evangelicalism, which historically, it's the mainstream evangelicals that put Ronald Reagan into office, that put a lot of people in office over the years to fight socialism, to fight open borders, to fight communism. Now, Satan has sent in his servants, his false teachers, his people masquerading as ministers of God, which they're not, they're masquerading that way, to take down what has largely been the biggest obstacle to Satan in America and on a global scale due to the Protestant evangelicals funding radio networks, gospel networks, TV, tracts, Bible printing, missions, biblical Christian schools. Satan had to come in and take down the evangelical church. And I think people like Russell Moore, Al Mohler, and now Mike Pence have helped to do it. Closing comment?
Absolutely. And we need to stop mistaking these guys for people who are standing for the good of the gospel and ignore the shaming, the political shaming, and the biblical shaming that they do, and realize these guys are working for the other team. And if Pence thinks he's going to redeem his image and his political career among evangelicals, he's certainly chosen the wrong partner, because people are very much on to Russell Moore and these guys. And I think, as I said in the beginning, that people aren't going to buy what these guys are selling. They're not going to buy Pence as a conservative. And I think we can thank your network and others who are standing up and speaking out about these things. And I appreciate the coverage you've continued to do through the years with the things that I dig up, that you dig up, and the book that you've put out, the many books. If people really want to know how all this stuff links together and see it documented before their eyes, they can reach their own conclusions and not just depend on our opinion about it. But the church is in decline, but the true church is triumphant in Christ. And I think we need to be praying for our nation. We need to be praying for our president. And we need to realize what the enemy is. These guys are trying to build the kingdom of Antichrist.
Absolutely.
And that is not the job of the church to aid in any fashion, on any level whatsoever.
30piecesofsilver.org, 30piecesofsilver.org. As always, Tom, our religious Trojan horse reporter, thanks for this. Appreciate the update tonight.
Thanks. Take care, brother.
30piecesofsilver.org. And you know, folks, a lot of people have stopped giving to the Southern Baptist Convention. Sadly, if you throw your money in the offering plate at your typical Southern Baptist church, about 10% of that goes back to the Southern Baptist headquarters. We have had people here that have, about a dozen or more families now, have, through estate planning, have put their family's estate to have a portion of their estate come to our foundation. Because they've said we can't trust to leave it to our church or many of these Christian organizations anymore, because they've gone full on social justice, social gospel, open borders, radical environmentalism, and we can't support that. And many of them have turned and said, we see your consistent and 35-year track record, and so we have put your foundation in our estate. Well, thank you for that, folks. And if you want to do that, we would appreciate it. I think we have a 35-year track record to prove. We're going to stay faithful, right? You know, the interesting thing, too, is we have several families, actually, that have said our kids have bought into the liberalism. Whether it's the religious liberalism or it's the political liberalism, they mock our Christianity, our true commitment to biblical values. They mock that we listen to guys like you, Brannon. They come to our table and sit at our table for Christmas. And one lady wrote us and said, our own children sat there at our own Christmas table mocking my husband and I Christmas dinner. And she wrote in a letter and she said, when they left, my husband and I said, we're not leaving these kids money because we're not funding that worldview. And we have now decided we're going to put your foundation in our estate planning. That's heartbreaking, to be honest with you. I don't want to hear that. I would rather, frankly, to hear that those parents have kids they can leave their money to that will continue the history and heritage of a Christian worldview of that family. But that's where we're at today, sadly. And you know who's helped lead these people astray, these young people who are now grown adults with their own children? Many of these false teachers in our churches and church denominations. The Lord warned again and again about these wolves in sheep's clothing, false prophets, false teachers, false apostles. You go to my website, worldviewtube.com, worldviewtube.com/vault. You can join our vault. Look what I want to show you. Look what I got added today. Worldviewtube.com/vault. My book that I wrote in 1993. This is my second book. My first book is on the New Age is Not So New, came out in 1990. That should be added before the weekend's over. But the second book I wrote in 1993, Cradle to College and Educational Abduction, that book has now been added today. You don't need to buy this stuff. You can go online and buy some of this stuff, I think, for like, depending on the day on Amazon, I've seen them as high as a couple $100. But download and boom, there is my book, Cradle to College and Educational Abduction. We called it Cradle to College, then in the fourth printing, an educational abduction. And you'll see this is a copy of exactly that, the fourth printing in March of 95, but it came out in 1993, okay? And you guys should read this to see what we were talking about, what I was talking about and warning about. America 2000, that was what George H. introduced. Bill Clinton changed it to America 2000. It was America 2000, I'm sorry, George H. And Clinton changed it to Goals 2000. And then George W. changed it to No Child Left Behind, Obama, Race to the Top, Common Core. It's all the same thing, but I've been writing on these things since the early 90s. Okay, and so you can go and get this as one of the books that's now available in our vault. Okay, it's available in the vault now. Let me show you another one we talked about a while ago, and that's Marxianity. Again, you don't need to go and buy Marxianity. You can. I think it's available for like $2.50 in my bookstore at worldviewstore.com. But look at this. Here's the book Marxianity, the one I wrote in 2018. It's like 300 pages. Okay, you can get that book. So all my books are now available other than Cosmic Humanism. The New Age is Not So New on Cosmic Humanism. That one's still got to be loaded. But Marxianity, you can get it right now as a vault member and learn more about what we were just talking about. how Marxism has been dragged right into the mainstream of evangelical Christianity. There it is. Marxianity, how Christianity, how Marxism and Christianity are merging. Okay? So check it out. Marxianity. All of that is automatically a part of your library when you join the vault. Worldviewtube.com/vault. Worldviewtube.com/vault. And by the way, when you join, you get access to over, well, what is now 35 years of content. Radio shows, TV shows, ebooks, audiobooks, conference DVDs, documentaries. You get all of this as part of your membership, okay, in the vault. All of these things are in there. Check it out, worldviewtube.com/vault. You'll also be able to live stream the upcoming event here in the Mid-South coming up on Saturday night, February 22nd. Just go to worldviewstore.com, worldviewstore.com. And when you go there, take a look at this. There it is. That's Saturday night, February 22nd, what we're calling our State of the Union panel with J.J. Carroll, Colonel Rob Maness, and Todd Bensman. And we're going to talk about all the things going on in our country, from our national security to our military to the Philippines coming under attack by China, Taiwan coming under attack by China, what's going on with Ukraine and Russia, what's going on in the Middle East with Gaza. We're going to talk about it all. The deportations of all the illegal invaders, opening up Guantanamo Bay to send some of these really violent illegal invaders they're rounding up. If you want to be a part of that live studio audience, the tickets are $5. We're not charging that to make money. That is just so we can get a database of people we can invite to these live events as a studio audience in the Mid-South, but also to vet who's coming into the building. So if you'd like to be here on Saturday night, February 22nd, we'd love to have you. All the details are there, including the hotels we recommend for you to stay in here in Collierville, just outside of Memphis. And if you want to fly in and be with us, come in and see the Mid-South, go to Graceland, go to the Pyramid, Bass Pro Shop, whatever. And then stay in Collierville. It's about 30 minutes from the Memphis airport, and be a part of that live studio audience. Now, if you know people that are in this area, maybe tell them about it. Say, hey, go to Worldview Store. Let's put up that other URL because that WVWTVstore.com URL doesn't work. I don't know why that quit working. We're trying to get it working again. Go to worldviewstore.com, please. Worldviewstore.com. That's our new URL. That other URL, they're moving it over, I think. That's why. But for now, if you want to get this, you got to go to worldviewstore.com. Okay? So tell your friends about worldviewstore.com where they can get the tickets if they live in the area. Okay? And again, I apologize. WVW TV Store stopped working because we're moving it over to a new system. But worldviewstore.com works, and you can get your tickets for that night. Now, again, if you're part of the vault, you're going to be able to live stream it, because that event that night is for live streaming members of the vault only, and you can join the vault for very little, about $95.88 a year, $9.99 a month. You can check out and join at worldviewtube.com/vault, worldviewtube.com/vault. All right, guys, don't forget, every day I update this website, worldviewreport.com, worldviewreport.com. I am up early and posting onto this page news I think you should read from around the world. Some of the stories we just don't have time to get to, folks, because there's so much going on in the world, but that doesn't mean it's not important. Look at this, 60 Minutes, owner Paramount ready to settle with Trump and his $10 billion lawsuit. What's that about? I think that's over editing. I think that's over the editing of the, Kamala Harris segment. Trump filed a lawsuit against CBS in October of last year, accusing the network of deceptive doctoring on the segment of then Vice President Kamala Harris. And apparently they are rushing to settle with Trump. I bet they are. Let's see here. What else do we have? President Trump says DC Black Hawk was flying too high by a lot. Remember we talked about a 200-foot ceiling? Remember that night? And I think they were up by the 400-foot site. The Black Hawk helicopter was flying too high by a lot. It was far above the 200-foot limit. That's not really too complicated to understand, is it? Yeah, President Trump. You know, he's frustrated about this because of the loss of life. What do we got now? 14 young skaters that have died. These cute kids that were working so hard at their craft, their trade, they're dead. And now we're hearing that the FAA worker may have been doing the work of 2 people. No wonder he's frustrated. Not only the loss of life, which is the most and greatest concern and heartbreak, but as I said to someone, think about it. The guy's not even been installed for 2 weeks. He's not even been in office 2 weeks. And he's having to continue to clean up the mess of Joe Biden and Barack Obama and their DEI, cultural Marxism, destroying agencies. We should be concentrating on the future of America and making America great again. But poor President Trump is having to spend a lot of his time cleaning up the messes and now the loss of life, I think, due to the policies of the cultural Marxist in the Obama and Biden administrations. See, what else do we have over here at worldviewreport.com? Look at this one. This is the gentleman that's going to be working for President Trump, the envoy to Israel. He says there's almost nothing left in the Gaza. Reconstruction will likely take 10 to 15 years. Well, can we just say that reconstruction, I think, should be beautiful homes on the ocean and resorts. And I think President Trump is right. Jordan and Egypt should take all these people. Of course, they don't want them, and we know why they don't want them, because they're nothing but troublemakers. And as one of the hostages came out and said, Dad, almost all those people there are for the hostages. There's like 2 million terrorists in Palestine. All of these Palestinians are for them. They voted Hamas into power. And Trump is right. They should be cleaned out of Palestine, and they should go to Egypt and Jordan, and Israel should never let that go back to them again. There's so many stories here. Several top FBI officials are told to resign or be fired as Trump continues federal purge. Good for him. A lot of stories here at worldviewreport.com. Worldviewreport.com. Trump wants to send worse criminals, migrants, to Guantanamo Bay. Yep. Look at this one. Elon Musk is plotting the mother of all blockchains. Saw another article this evening on that. We're going to have to cover that more next week. Time won't allow tonight. But there's so many articles. Again, just because we don't have time to talk about it doesn't mean it's not important. There's just only so many broadcast hours in a day. Check it out. It's brought to you every day, free of charge. I update this page myself personally every day. Worldviewreport.com. Worldviewreport.com. By the way, if you appreciate all we're doing, here's another way to support us and your health. This is the wellness company, and the website is worldviewhealthcare.com. Ooh, I caught them. There you go. Worldviewhealthcare.com is the new URL we went to. You got that one, guys. Worldviewhealthcare.com. Get your free meds. We have a worldviewhealthcare.com URL, guys. Lower third. There it is. Worldviewhealthcare.com. Get your meds. Have them in place. And then you won't, let's see all this flu and stuff going around. You won't have to worry about running to the urgent care and all that, because you'll have the meds you need. So it doesn't have to be a big catastrophic grid down situation. It could just be you get sick and you don't want to mess with going to urgent care to get an antibiotic. You've already got yours. You're ready to go. And you can also check out their medical plan and sign up for their medical plan that includes free prescriptions and pharmacy coaching. Their elite wellness includes free prescription and free supplements for just $99.99 a month. Doesn't take long to save that money, because some of these supplements, it's just a matter of 60, 70, 80 bucks, like the spike protein stuff. That's $89.99, the ultimate spike detox. So it doesn't take long before you're saving money, folks, by joining that club. That spike support's $64.99. So check all that out, worldviewhealthcare.com, worldviewhealthcare.com.